Hello, my name is Saket. We are playing Stardew Valley, and today we're going to talk some more about how Stardew Valley isn't a horror game, but this world that we are in and our place in it are both very strange. There's a combination of hard and soft world building in Stardew Valley. Some things you learn directly, some things you piece together, or you get an idea of what the shape of it might be, without maybe knowing about the thing itself. So before I start speculating, I think we should probably start first with what we know. Now, as far as the layout of the world goes, we don't know much, but we do know a few things because we have this map. We can see ice caps, we can see a large landmass, we can see a smaller landmass, we can see some islands. Now, we know Fern Island is tropical. It's not clear if we can see it on the map, but based on what we see here, we can say for sure with the ice caps and everything that this is a round world like we're used to, orbiting around a regular star in space, or at least that's certainly the most likely. Now, about where we are specifically, we know we're somewhere in the Ferngill Republic, probably somewhere in the middle of it, both because we know that Zuzu City to the north and the Ginger Islands to the south are also part of Ferngill Republic. And also, there is a war on, but we see very little of it touching us here directly. Most people don't really talk about it, but we do meet a few people who have some information about current events like that. Now, I would guess that the Ferngill Republic is pretty big, seeing as how Stardew Valley is temperate and this isle is tropical. Hey, buddy. Another thing about Stardew Valley is it's very unusual to have a valley by the seaside. That's generally where a river meets a sea, you get a delta. And it's not called Stardew Valley, or it's not called Stardew Delta, it's called Stardew Valley. So what that says to me is there's a valley here for a reason. And one of the ways you might get something like that with a river running down it, as opposed to a delta, which is something you might normally see, is a large meteor crashing. Now, famously, on Earth, our own dinosaurs were likely destroyed, or at least their major extinction event began. I should say they lived past this, but, they were kind of done. That crashing of the big meteor that formed the Gulf of Mexico. I think we have a similar situation here. Now, at first glance, the Feast of the Winter Star looks like your, standard American holiday sort of thing. Turns out, Feast of the Winter Star isn't celebrated everywhere. It's only celebrated here. There's a particularly bright star that can be seen, but only from Stardew Valley. And people think that may even be where the star drop fruit comes from. Now, the kind of star you only see from one specific place could be object in geosynchronous orbit. Now, one of the most curious things about the valley, in addition to its sheer geological diversity, we can probably write that off as video games, is this stuff, iridium. Now, iridium is not purple in real life. It is a real metal. It's actually silvery in color. It would look very much like the iron does in this. Iridium is rare. It's not rare here. Now, although iridium is naturally occurring on Earth, there isn't very much of it. It's very rare. Where there are concentrations of it, in any reasonable amount, are meteorites. We get it from space, basically. Now, in an amazing coincidence, we got meteorites of the stuff falling from the sky all the time. All that iridium's coming from somewhere, right? All those meteorites are coming from somewhere. Now, everything important associated with iridium is purple, and most important things in this game are purple. Some of it is signposting that purple is important, like just Abigail really, really liking it. Others of it are a little more specific. Star fruit is important enough that the game tracks how many we've eaten. It gives us a permanent boost to our energy. It's purple, and it's about star. Even got stars over here, but I think those are just stars. I don't think that's the same thing at all. Like we have the statue here. It's purple, spits out iridium. Our axe, it's iridium. And top tier fishing rod, advanced iridium. Top tier pick, iridium pickaxe. Now this, it doesn't say it's iridium, does it? But it is the right color. And it also is called the Galaxy Sword. So here we're seeing another connection with iridium and star. And by another connection, it might be the first connection that I'm mentioning because I'm shooting all of this out of order. Now the super cucumber, weird thing that it is probably infused with iridium. You can tell the wizard really likes it. Our Asmodeus here is not the only person with purple hair. Key also has it. Abigail has it. Abigail canonically dyes hers. Her mom tells us that. I don't think Raz is over here dyeing his eyebrows, though. He doesn't, he's kind of a sartorial fellow, but I don't think he takes things quite that far. Something else going on there, and it's probably iridium. Now, it's very likely that there's some iridium in higher amounts than we would find it on Earth all over this planet. Whether that's always been the case, and that's why magic is common here, whether magic became, or at least the magic we see, became common after the big asteroid that's still apparently disintegrating up there and falling down on our heads, whether that was the change. But regardless, we know it's here, and we got to deal with it. So I think that the simplest explanation is that while there always was probably some magic here, it's really strong here, and that's why there is a wizard and a Mr. Key, and, this is important, a grandpa, all focused on this particular area of this planet. Now, the wizard, we can see he's been spending a lot of his time around iridium and things that have to do with iridium. Now, if we're going to talk about the condition of the world and the culture around us, we kind of have to talk about Yoba. Now, we don't really know much about Yoba at the beginning, but we know it has something to do with this. Now, speaking of Yoba, once we get Pam our house, we start to learn a little more about what she thinks, and she tells you it's the sign of the vessel, in case you didn't already know it. Of course, she doesn't want us to tell Pierre she got it from Jojo. It's pretty funny. And she's gonna look around. She's gonna tell us some things. Now, Pam here is looking for some meaning in her life. We're not gonna tell her that Yoba isn't real, because something called Yoba, or something like something called Yoba, certainly is. Every so often, if you come in here, you'll find a couple of them. It's not super clear what they believe about Yoba. George seems to think it has something to do with death. Jody doesn't even seem like she's thinking about it at all. A lot of gold. It's just nice. But it's curious, isn't it? Now we have what we know is called the sign of the vessel up here. So, while we don't know what anybody here really believes about this stuff, we also kind of know that in terms of the lore of the world, it doesn't matter that much, because The sign of the vessel that they're actually all looking at was the dwarf's spaceship. Ultimately, we don't know much about what people believe about Yoba. It very likely has very little to do with the reality. It's not clear how long ago the events happened that gave rise to that particular story. It does not appear to be connected to the Winter Star. That does not appear to be a religious festival at all. On the other hand, there are a few things that I think we can say. Nowhere in the game do we see anything like priests. Now, say what you like about religion, it's probably difficult to have a professional priestly caste supported by a society that has access to magic. Maybe the best look we get at the symbol is this right here. Now this Abigail and I put up after I got jumped by one of the shadow people out here. You can see it looks like there's a little iridium trim on it to make it special. But we can see that the figure at the top is not just a bar, the same width as the pole that's supporting it. It looks almost like wings, doesn't it? Now we know if we talk to our friend Krobos, this is called the sign of the vessel. Now we share this world with all kinds of other intelligences. We got talking animals out in cinder sap. But we know the livestock doesn't talk. But there is that strange magic pig. And there's also the shadow people, of which our friend Krobos here is one. Now, the shadow people generally are not huge fans of people, and that's understandable when you know their history a little bit. There's a scene after you make friends with Krobos where someone will meet a little later, a dwarf. A dwarf and Krobos have a conversation, then get into a fight that you break up, and then Rasmodius helps you break up, possibly in a more permanent, less consensual way. Krobos and the dwarf, as we're listening to their conversation, they inform us in very specific terms that when the dwarves crashed there, they went underground and began fighting a war with the shadow people, which the dwarves appear to have in large part lost. There are a lot more shadow people around than there are dwarves around, and the bitterness extends to this day, at least on part of the dwarf we meet. Now, as we're digging around the geography, we'll eventually find something like this. Let's see. I've got it right in the middle there, so I can't select it. Let's see if it'll let us rearrange it. No. Gunther's very mean to me. Anyway, this thing right here. This is a piece of elven jewelry. Everybody knows it's elven. Gunther identified it as elven. It doesn't look much like the shadow stuff. The shadow people, who I believe are associated with the element that we think of in the game as void. The elves, you see this nice gold color. Well, what happened to them? Where'd they go? Well, I think there's a really terrible answer to that question. Now, the colors of the void, apparently, at least we can see from the chicken, black and red. Now and again, the witch flies through, and she curses the chicken coop, and one of the chickens gets sick and lays a void egg. Now, we have some void chickens already, but this one I just picked up off the floor. I don't want to eat it. But void is very important, and the witch is associated with it. Now, if you go fishing out there in her swamp, you can catch void salmon, which isn't something you see many other places. Now, the shadow people, as we already established, they have some void essence in their makeup, just like the elves in their creations have solar essence. It doesn't mean they're evil. Krobos obviously isn't. And when you think about, some little larcenous jerks falling from the sky, invading your home and stealing everything that isn't nailed down. If they can pry it up, it isn't nailed down. You can perhaps understand the animosity. However, at this point, according to the wizard, the fight, which was called the Shadow Wars, that was over centuries ago. It's not the war that Kent was involved in, and it's only important to us here in terms of teaching us that history. Now we see plenty of shadow people around, and they and some other things like them drop this void essence. Void is one of the two basic forces in this universe. The other one is solar. What's this have to do with anything? Well, it's kind of important. You'll notice it's not like good and evil. It's not even as morally weighted as light and dark. It's just, solar and void, and the two are very complementary. And I think that just as we have seen the shadow people drop the void essence, I think we are seeing the solar people, strange as they may currently seem to us, drop this stuff. And I think those solar creatures are the elves. Now there are various ciphers in here. One on this sort of level reads something like, "Wizard sealed us in here until a hero can lay us to rest." Apparently has something to do with the mummies. Now the mummies, as you probably know, they drop solar essence. Like a few other things here and there. And I think the difference, or the relationship at least, between solar and void, which as you can see some other things drop, is going to be important. I'm afraid, folks, that our elves are right here. There's some reason why it takes a special sword or a huge explosion to destroy them. Notice the Crusader, it's all in purple. Now, it's not clear if the elves were poisoned by the iridium directly, or if what happened to them that made them had to be wrapped up like that and very difficult to kill, and what made the wizard trap them down here. Out of the way, you. Well, whether that was done intentionally or unintentionally is what I'm trying to say. Like, they might have just been poisoned by exposure when it started coming down. Or maybe it was kind of like the Stardew Valley elf version of digging too greedily in too deep. They were trying to do something with the iridium and solar energy. Maybe the things that produced, the various water-related things that also do fire. Like, why is the squid kid a fireball that just floats there? Isn't that weird? Who are the little helmet guys? They look like they might have been created for war, right? So, maybe. Or they could have just gotten poisoned. But either way, folks, I think that's what happened to the elves. They're still here with us, just in an extremely unfortunate form for them, and occasionally for us if we're not careful down here. Why do I think that? Well, the wizard trapped them down here, right? Now, the wizard, that implies the wizard is very old, but maybe so is everybody else in Stardew Valley. Old Lewis from the first episode. The point is, we got a bunch of guys in bandages down there in Skull Cavern that at one time didn't need to be trapped anywhere until they did. And they got trapped down there by the wizard. And we also have some missing elves. Now, correlation is not causation, but given that everything else we see evidence of, we meet some living excrements of, well, those elves have got to be somewhere. And those guys are trapped down there for a reason. Well, you have to talk about the dwarves. There's a couple of things that we know about the dwarves from the lore inside the game, and they'll tell us so too. Our friend the dwarf isn't from here. He's not from this planet at all. He likes us. He lives underground. We give him things. But he's not from here. He crashed. He didn't just crash. He's one of the original dwarves who crashed here. Now, the first dwarf we meet is this guy here. He's a funny guy. His name's Dwarf. We'll often see dwarves in this little setup. They'll have a, couple of little cushions or whatever, table, a chest. This is not the only dwarf we'll meet, but this is definitely the one we talk to the longest. Sell some cool stuff. So, why is he here? Well, the dwarves, if you listen to their story, they basically crashed here. Why did they crash here? That's a good question. It probably has something to do with that giant hunk of iridium in geosynchronous orbit above the town. The dwarves, by their own admission, are scavengers. They would totally fly a spaceship out to scavenge an asteroid full of iridium, and they crash. And they get driven underground, where they end up going to war with the shadow people. One friend, the dwarf, may not be the only dwarf around. We got another friend over here. Oh, we could learn a warp totem. That'd be nice. Another place we can go fishing. Exit shortcut. I think so. Delightful. Now we know that the dwarves, had advanced technology. Obviously, if they came here in a spaceship, they did, but we still find it around. Now, we, the player, don't know how it works, but other people do. Now, Demetrius, for instance, is a scientist. He sent us a recipe for this gadget, which is built off of the advanced dwarf, whatever it was. So some people definitely know how to use it, or at least make it do stuff. Now, in the last episode, we saw the Juminos, and we know our friend here has a connection with them. First time we meet him, we hear him say something, or he writes us a letter saying something that only someone who was there, would have known. Unless it was, of course, pre-planned beforehand, but that's a subject for another episode. Now, here's the strange thing. As you move through the community center quests, you get the idea that the Juminos have been brought here. They've been brought here from somewhere else. And what they do when they're here in a hut just like this in the community center, for example, by giving our little guys here, they even bounce a little bit like slimes, don't they? For example, if we help our little guys out here by giving them stuff they need, they will take some place that looks like this and into something that looks more like this. And not is it just as good as new? It's just back to the same way it ever was, with progress having been made. And that's a recurring theme that we're going to come back to in the next episode. So we have these slimes. They're some of the most common things that you see in terms of enemies in the game. They're everywhere. Hey, look, you'll see them around, and they have, many of them, little antennas on the top of their head that look an awful lot like the little antennas that Juminos have on the top of their heads. But what the real kicker for me is the petrified slime, which looks very much like a Jumino. So yeah, the iridium corrupted them, and the only uncorrupt Juminos available that can help clean things up are from so far away the wizard has to summon them. Now the other one's been deciphered to read something like iridium cursed us. There's a little bit more, but it's the iridium cursed us that's the important part. Now some have taken that to mean that it's the iridium slimes specifically, the big ones. But I don't think that's the case. So what it seems like I think we can reasonably say is that this world, for whatever reason, has always had a higher concentration of iridium, purple iridium, to signpost it really clearly. in the game. And at some point, a particularly large asteroid that was particularly iridium-rich got captured by this planet in geosynchronous orbit. Now, it's likely, at this late date, that asteroid is mostly disintegrated. In fact, there may have just been little pieces of it caught up there in geosynchronous orbit that have been coming down for centuries, and a huge piece of it fell down long ago. Given the geography of the area and the fact that not too far away out in the desert, the farther underground you go, the more iridium-rich it gets, it seems like the latter is the most likely. Now, either by exposure or messing around with things they shouldn't have, the elves, well, they're not recognizably elves anymore. The Juminos, who our wizard is a good friends with, some of them were corrupted by iridium and became the slimes we know today. And the closer they are to the source of that iridium, the more corrupt they get. Farther down they go, closer to that big core of meteor. We know that time here is very strange. We know the wizard is very old and is basically soaked in iridium, which also appears to be powering all of our magic. Now, at some point, the dwarves crashed here in a ship that probably looks very much like this sign of the vessel that we see here. Either a pair of wings on a stick like we see up in the backwoods, or maybe that's supposed to represent like a rocket ship with fins pointing down. That's certainly possible. The dwarves were very long-lived. They're still around. They had the original ones are still around. They do not appear to become poisoned by iridium or even changed by it. They have advanced technology, which we can use at least some of it, some of us, not all of us. I don't know how it all works, but other people do, and I can follow their instructions to assemble things like this out of it. But that leaves us in an interesting position, doesn't it? This place is soaked in magic. We're learning how to do magic, but it appears that the wizard might not be the nicest guy that we've ever met. And, he's locking undead elves up or whatever they are down in Skull Cavern, and he's right here. He's manipulating you. You saw the Juminos. He knows about them. They told him about the rat joke. What's really going on here? Now, the history of this world, as far as we're concerned, is purple. It's all about that iridium. There's a war going on, but although it has an effect on some of the people around us personally, the events of that war do not break into the plane of the game unless, you start installing mods, and that's a whole other story. So, I guess the next question, now that we know where we are, is who are we? And what is the agenda of the people around us? Who's pulling the strings? And that's something we're going to have to talk about in the next episode. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you then.